Some betrayals don't begin with shouting. They begin with a smile from someone who believes they've already won. The night my husband stood up at our dining table and proudly announced that his mother was moving into my house. He expected me to smile. He expected my parents to applaud. He expected his mother to start planning where she'd put her favorite chair. Instead, 45 minutes later, my marriage was over. My mother-in-law had lost the dream she'd spent years trying to steal. And my husband learned the most expensive lesson of his life. If you've ever worked your whole life for something only to watch someone else act like they were entitled to it, this story might stay with you. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. I always enjoy reading your comments. And if stories about family, betrayal, justice, and finding the courage to stand up for yourself mean something to you, I'd be honored if you subscribe to Sad Drama Stories. My name is Teresa Meyers. I'm 33 years old, and for almost 5 years, I believed I had a happy marriage. Looking back now, I think I confused peace with silence. I work as a nurse practitioner at a hospital in Roanoke, Virginia, 3 12-hour night shifts every week, sometimes 4 when someone called in sick. It's exhausting work. You spend your nights calming frightened families, comforting patients who are having the worst day of their lives, and making decisions that can change everything in a matter of seconds. When I came home, I wanted one thing: peace. Instead, I unknowingly walked into another full-time job, managing my own household. Bills, groceries, meal planning, scheduling repairs, remembering birthdays, paying insurance, renewing registrations if it needed to be done. I did it. At the time, I told myself that was what good wives did. Now I know something different. There's a huge difference between being a partner and carrying someone else's responsibilities while they call it love. My husband, Grant, worked as a regional sales manager. He was one of those people who could make friends with almost anyone. Cashiers, neighbors, waiters, 5 minutes with Grant, and people felt like they'd known him for years. That charm was one of the reasons I fell in love with him. The other reason was how kind he seemed. He remembered my favorite coffee. He surprised me with flowers after difficult shifts. He even learned my parents' anniversary without me telling him. Can you imagine meeting someone who seemed to notice every little detail about you? That's exactly who I thought I'd married. My parents adored him, especially my mother. She used to tell people Teresa found herself a gentleman. I believed that too, until I realized something. Charm isn't character. Sometimes, it's just a really convincing performance. About 2 weeks before our wedding, my parents invited me over for dinner. After we finished eating, my dad disappeared into the bedroom and came back carrying a large manila envelope. He slid it across the table without saying a word. Inside was a property deed. I looked up, completely confused. "Dad," he smiled, "it's yours." I thought he meant someday after they passed away. He shook his head. No, today. My parents had spent nearly 20 years saving every extra dollar they had. Dad worked long days as a plumber. Mom stood behind a grocery store register for more than 2 decades. They skipped vacations, drove old cars, rarely bought anything for themselves, and without telling me, they had bought me a house, paid in full. I couldn't stop crying, neither could Mom. Then Dad said something that didn't seem important back then, but years later. Those words would save my life. "The deed is in your maiden name, Teresa. Keep every piece of paperwork. You never know when you'll need it." I laughed through my tears. "Dad, you're worrying too much." He smiled. "I hope I am." I had no idea that one day those documents would become the difference between losing everything and keeping the home my parents had sacrificed 20 years to give me. At the time, I simply hugged them, thanked them, and promised I'd take care of it forever. I meant every word. I just never imagined the biggest threat to that promise would be the man I was about to marry. The first year of our marriage felt almost effortless. We weren't wealthy. We didn't travel to expensive resorts. We didn't have picture-perfect lives, but we laughed. We cooked dinner together. We argued about silly things like whether pineapple belonged on pizza. The ordinary moments made me believe I'd chosen the right person. Looking back, I think that's what made the betrayal so difficult. It never starts with something big. It starts with tiny things that are easy to excuse. The first sign was Grant's mother, Vivian. Whenever her name appeared on his phone, everything else stopped. It didn't matter if we were eating dinner, watching a movie, or having an important conversation. He answered every single time. At first, I understood. She had raised 2 children alone after her husband left. That couldn't have been easy. I respected that. I even admired her strength. But after a while, I noticed something strange. Grant never made a decision without asking her first. Buying a new couch? I'll see what Mom thinks. Planning a weekend trip? Mom already had something in mind. Painting the living room? Mom likes lighter colors. Can I ask you something? Have you ever felt like there were 3 people in your marriage, even though only 2 of you lived in the house? That's exactly how it began to feel. I mentioned it one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner. Do you think your mom has a little too much influence over us? Grant stopped drying the plate in his hands. He looked genuinely offended. She's my mother. I know, she just wants what's best. I let it go. Not because I agreed, because I didn't think it was worth an argument. Sometimes peace feels easier than honesty, until the day honesty becomes unavoidable. A few months later, Vivian started visiting almost every weekend. Friday afternoon, she'd arrive. Sunday evening, she'd leave. The first few visits were pleasant. She brought homemade banana bread, helped wash dishes, told funny stories about Grant as a little boy. I actually enjoyed having her around. But then something changed. Grant stopped asking if I was okay with the visits. Instead, he simply announced them. Mom's coming Friday. Mom's staying the weekend. Mom will probably sleep in the guest room. Not once. Is that okay with you? One Friday afternoon, I finally said something. Grant, I'd appreciate it if you asked me before inviting people to stay. He looked confused. It's my mom. I know, but this is still our home. He shook his head. Mom doesn't need permission. Those words stayed with me all weekend, not because they were loud, because they quietly erased me from the conversation. The following Tuesday, I came home after a 12-hour shift. I was exhausted. All I wanted was a hot shower and a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. As I walked through the living room, something caught my eye. The navy curtains my mother and I had picked out together were gone. In their place, cream-colored lace curtains. I stood there staring, certain I'd walked into the wrong house. Vivian came out of the kitchen carrying a mug of tea. Oh, you noticed? She smiled proudly. Don't they brighten the room? I looked from the curtains, back to her. You changed them? I bought them myself. She smiled as though she'd done me a favor. A little gift. I forced a polite smile. They were beautiful before. Oh, sweetheart, she laughed softly. They were so dark. This feels much more like home. Home, that word echoed in my mind, like home, whose home? Mine. Or the one she was slowly creating in her imagination? That evening, I asked Grant why he hadn't told me. He barely looked up from his phone. Mom was just helping. Helping. Funny how people use that word when they're changing things that don't belong to them. A few days later, Vivian and I were alone in the kitchen washing dishes. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Then, without even looking at me, she quietly said, "You married into this family." I smiled politely. I did. She dried her hands slowly, then looked me directly in the eyes. And the house came with you? I felt something inside me tighten. I placed the plate I'd been drying back into the sink. No, I kept my voice calm. The house didn't come with anyone. My parents bought it for me. She smiled. Not warmly, confidently. Like someone who already believed the ending belonged to her. She didn't argue, she simply walked away. At the time, I thought it was just an awkward conversation. I didn't realize. It was the first time she openly told me exactly what she believed. And unfortunately, she wasn't the only one who believed it anymore. After that conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about what Vivian had said. The house came with you? At first, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. Maybe I was just exhausted from too many overnight shifts. It's amazing how often we explain away someone else's behavior just to avoid facing the truth. Life moved on, at least on the surface. But little things started happening that I couldn't ignore anymore. Grant's younger sister, Courtney, began stopping by more often. And by stopping by, I mean walking into my house like she'd lived there her entire life. She never knocked. The front door would open and I'd hear her cheerful voice. Anybody home? Sometimes she'd stay for 15 minutes, sometimes 4 hours. She'd leave coffee mugs on the counter, blankets tossed across the couch, and somehow my refrigerator always looked emptier after she left. I kept telling myself she's family, but family and respect should go together. One afternoon, I came home early after a training seminar had been canceled. The house was unusually quiet. I set my bag down and started walking toward my home office. The door was open. Courtney was sitting in my desk chair with her feet propped on my desk. My laptop sat open in front of her. She wasn't working. She was scrolling through social media like she owned the place. She looked up and smiled. "Oh, hey, I just wanted somewhere quiet." I stared at her for a moment, not because I was angry, because I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. "Grant said I could use any room." She said it so casually, as if that explained everything. I took a slow breath. Can you imagine coming home after a long day, only to find someone sitting in your private workspace? Without ever asking, I stepped inside. "Courtney, this room isn't for guests." She rolled her eyes. "Seriously, it's just a desk." "No," I smiled politely. "It's my office." She shrugged dramatically and walked out. As she passed me, she muttered, "You're so protective." Protective. That word stayed with me because protecting your own space isn't selfish. It's healthy. That evening, I called a locksmith. The next morning, a lock was installed on my office door, nothing dramatic, just a simple key lock. One key stayed on my keychain. The spare went into the fireproof box where I kept important documents. When Grant noticed it later that night, he frowned. "You actually locked the office?" "Yes. Don't you think that's a little extreme?" I looked at him. "Not after today," he sighed. "You're turning this house into a fortress." I smiled sadly. "Maybe people should stop treating it like it's public property." He didn't answer. Looking back now, I've realized something about Grant. Whenever he knew he was wrong, he rarely argued. He went quiet, and somehow his silence made me even more nervous than his anger. About 3 weeks later, I came home after 2 back-to-back night shifts. I could barely keep my eyes open. As I walked past the guest room, I stopped. Something felt different. The bed had brand new floral bedding. A reading lamp sat on the nightstand. Fresh flowers rested beside it. There was a framed photograph of Grant and Vivian on the dresser. And then I saw it. Vivian's suitcase completely unpacked. Her clothes were hanging neatly inside the closet. Shoes lined up against the wall. A sweater folded across the bed. This wasn't someone staying for the weekend. This looked like someone who had already moved in. I found Grant in the kitchen eating breakfast. "What happened to the guest room?" He didn't even look surprised. "I fixed it up." "For who?" "For Mom." I blinked. "You redecorated an entire bedroom?" Without talking to me, he looked up from his cereal. "She's staying here more often, so I wanted her to feel comfortable." Comfortable. I leaned against the counter. "Grant, she's welcome to visit, but this isn't her room." He pushed his bowl away. "You keep saying your house and your room. We're married. It's our house." I looked at him for a long moment, then quietly said the words I'd never imagined I'd have to say to my own husband. "The deed doesn't say that." His expression changed instantly. "You sound like a landlord." "No," I answered softly. "I sound like someone trying to protect what her parents spent 20 years building." He stood up so quickly his chair scraped across the floor. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and walked out. The front door slammed behind him. I stood there alone in the kitchen. Something deep inside me whispered that this argument wasn't really about a bedroom. It was about ownership, control, and a battle I hadn't realized had already begun. The frightening part was that I still had no idea how far Grant was willing to go to win. Grant didn't mention our argument again. Not the next day. Not the day after that. He acted as if nothing had happened. If you didn't know him, you might have thought we'd worked everything out, but I knew better. By then, I'd started recognizing his pattern. Grant didn't always fight out loud. Sometimes he simply waited, and somehow that worried me more. A few days later, I opened the mailbox after getting home from work. Mixed in with the usual bills and grocery coupons was a small receipt from a locksmith. At first, I almost threw it away. Then I noticed Grant's name. I unfolded it. 3 duplicate house keys, paid for 2 days earlier. My stomach dropped. I stood there on the front porch reading the receipt over and over. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe he'd lost his key. Maybe. The front door opened behind me. Grant walked into the hallway carrying his gym bag. "What are you reading?" I held up the receipt. "What's this?" He barely glanced at it. "Oh, I made an extra key." My heart sank. "For who?" He shrugged. "For Mom," just like that, as casually as if he'd said he'd picked up milk on the way home. I stared at him. "You gave your mother a key to this house?" "Without asking me," he sighed dramatically. "Teresa, stop acting like this house only belongs to you." I felt my chest tighten. "The paperwork says it does." "There you go again, you and that deed." He walked upstairs before I could answer, leaving me standing alone in the hallway, holding a receipt that suddenly felt much heavier than a piece of paper should. Can you imagine discovering someone gave away access to your home without even thinking they should tell you? That wasn't forgetfulness. That was entitlement. And entitlement only grows when nobody challenges it. I didn't argue, instead. I picked up my phone. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, every exterior lock on the house had been changed. Front door, back door, garage entrance. Brand new locks, 2 keys. One stayed on my keychain. The other went straight into the same fireproof box where I kept the deed. When Vivian arrived the following afternoon, I watched quietly through the living room window. She smiled as she walked toward the front door, slipped her key into the lock, turned it once, twice, then frowned. She tried again, nothing. She looked confused. A few seconds later, her phone came out. Inside the house, Grant's phone started ringing. "What?" he answered. I watched his expression change, then he looked directly at me. "You changed the locks?" "Yes." His jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because guests knock." He stared at me. "My mother isn't a guest." I held his gaze. "In this house, everyone is." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he grabbed his jacket, walked past me, and slammed the front door behind him. I watched him drive away, probably straight to Vivian's apartment. For the first time in months, the house became completely quiet. No unexpected visitors, no doors opening without permission, no feeling that I had to protect every room in my own home. I sat on the couch, closed my eyes, and finally felt something I'd almost forgotten: ownership. Not because my name was on a legal document, because for the first time in a long time, my home actually felt like mine again. But peace can be deceptive. Sometimes. It's only the silence before the next storm. For almost 2 weeks, Grant barely spoke to me. He slept in the guest room, a room he now jokingly called Mom's room. He stopped arguing, stopped complaining, stopped bringing up the locks. Looking back, that should have frightened me, because Grant was never more dangerous than when he looked like he'd accepted defeat. One evening, he came home carrying a small white box. He set it on the kitchen counter. "I've got a solution." I looked down. A smart lock, no more physical keys. "We can unlock the house with our phones." I hesitated. Honestly, it sounded reasonable. Maybe this was his way of moving forward. Maybe we were finally going to stop fighting over keys. "I'll agree," I said carefully, "but I'm the primary administrator. No one gets access without my permission." He smiled immediately. Of course, the lock was installed that weekend. I opened the app, created the account, made myself the primary owner. Grant became the secondary user. I checked the user list 3 different times. Only 2 names appeared, mine and his. Finally, I allowed myself to relax. What I didn't know was that while I was checking who already had access, I never stopped to ask who Grant might be planning to add next. For the first week after we installed the smart lock, nothing happened, at least, nothing I noticed. Grant became strangely pleasant again. He asked how my shifts were going. He brought home my favorite coffee one morning. He even offered to cook dinner. If someone had walked into our house during that week, they would have thought we'd finally worked through our problems. But something inside me refused to relax. You know that feeling when everything looks normal, yet your instincts keep whispering, "Pay attention." That's exactly how I felt. Work became busier than ever. One of our ICU nurses went on maternity leave, and I volunteered to cover extra night shifts. 3 12-hour shifts quickly turned into 5. By the time I got home each morning, I was running on coffee and pure determination. I barely had enough energy to shower before falling asleep. Looking back, I think Grant had been waiting for me to become that exhausted. Because tired people stop checking details, and details were exactly where he liked to hide things. About 2 weeks after the smart lock was installed, my phone rang just after 7 in the morning. I had barely walked through the front door after another long shift. The caller ID surprised me. Vivian, she almost never called me directly, I answered. Hello, her voice sounded softer than I'd ever heard it, almost fragile. Teresa, I've been thinking about us. I sat down on the edge of the bed. She talked for nearly 15 minutes about getting older, about how lonely her apartment felt after dark, about eating dinner by herself every night, about losing her home years ago after her divorce. I don't want to spend the rest of my life alone. For a moment, I saw something I'd never really seen before. Not the woman who criticized my house, not the woman who rearranged my furniture, just someone carrying 20 years of heartbreak. Can I be honest? My heart actually hurt for her. Because pain is real, even when the person carrying it isn't treating you fairly. When she finished talking, I answered as gently as I could. Vivian, I'm truly sorry for everything you went through. I really am. There was silence on the other end. Then I continued, but this house isn't the answer. I'd be happy to help you look into a nice community. Somewhere with activities, friends, people your own age. She didn't answer for several seconds. Then her voice changed completely, cold, sharp. I'm 63. I'm not 80. I don't need strangers. I need my family. I'm not sending you anywhere, I replied quietly. I'm offering to help. They're two different things. She hung up. No goodbye, nothing, just silence. That evening, Grant didn't come home until almost midnight. He smelled like cigarette smoke and the lavender air freshener Vivian always kept in her apartment. He didn't ask about my day, didn't say hello. He walked straight into the guest room and shut the door. I sat alone in the kitchen staring at my cup of tea, thinking about one sentence Vivian had said. I need my family. The sad part. I believed she meant it. The frightening part, I also believed she thought becoming family meant taking over someone else's life. A week later, she came over carrying an old shoebox. The cardboard was faded, held together with a thick rubber band. She placed it gently on my kitchen table. Inside were dozens of old photographs. Most were faded with age. One immediately caught my attention. A beautiful two-story house with green shutters. A wraparound porch, a swing hanging from an old oak tree. Standing in front of it was a much younger Vivian. Beside her stood a little boy holding a baseball glove. Grant, that was our house. She smiled sadly. I painted every room myself. She turned the photograph over. On the back, someone had written Christmas 1998. For the next 20 minutes, she told me about the day everything fell apart. Her husband leaving. Packing the car, Grant asking if they were ever coming home again. Courtney crying in the back seat because she didn't understand why they couldn't stay. By the time she finished, both of us were quiet. I handed the photograph back. I'm sorry you lost your home. I really am. She looked hopeful, as though she thought I'd finally understand. Then I gently added, but taking mine won't bring yours back. Her smile disappeared. She slowly put every photograph back into the shoebox, wrapped the rubber band around it, picked it up, and walked out without another word. I watched from the window as she drove away. Something about the way she looked at me before leaving sent a chill through me. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't even anger. It looked like determination. And somehow, I had a feeling she wasn't finished trying to make my house her home. 2 days later, I came home just after 7 in the morning. Another 12-hour shift. Another night of alarms, emergency calls, and trying to hold frightened families together. I unlocked the front door. The first thing I noticed was the smell of fresh coffee. I froze. I hadn't made coffee before leaving. Grant wasn't home. Slowly, I walked into the living room. Courtney was asleep on my couch, wrapped in my favorite blanket. A plate with toast crumbs sat on the coffee table. My refrigerator door wasn't completely closed. And then, my eyes landed on something that made my stomach drop. My laptop. It wasn't inside my office. It was sitting on the coffee table. Closed, but definitely moved. I walked over quietly. Nothing appeared to be missing. Still, someone had been inside my office. Someone had decided they had permission. I looked toward the hallway. Courtney was just beginning to wake up. She rubbed her eyes and smiled. Oh, you're home. Can you imagine walking into your own house and feeling like you're the guest? I asked as calmly as I could. How did you get in? She looked confused. The front door. I know, but how? She shrugged. The app. My heart skipped. The app. Without saying another word, I opened the smart lock application on my phone. Then I opened the activity log. There it was. Front door unlocked. Courtney Meyers, yesterday, 2:13 p.m. I stared at the screen, my hands suddenly felt cold. I had never added Courtney, not once, not ever, which meant someone else had. I called Grant immediately. He answered after the fourth ring. Hey, how does Courtney have access to the smart lock? Silence, just for a second, then, oh, I added her. You what? It's just easier. She's family, that word again. As though it magically erased every boundary I'd ever tried to set. You added another person. After I specifically said no one gets access without asking me, he sighed loudly. Teresa, you're making this into a bigger issue than it is. No, I kept my voice steady. I'm asking a very simple question. Did you ignore what we agreed to? Another pause, then, yes. But I ended the call. There wasn't anything left to hear. I walked over to Courtney. She was sitting upright now, still holding my blanket. What's going on? I smiled politely. I'm removing your access. She frowned. Grant said Grant doesn't own this house. I opened the app, selected her profile, remove user, one tap. Done. Courtney stared at me. You seriously kicked me out? No, I answered calmly. I removed access that should never have been given. She looked genuinely offended. I thought we were family. I took a deep breath. Family doesn't walk into someone's home without permission. She grabbed her purse. I'll tell Grant. I know you will. She left 20 minutes later. The house became quiet again. I immediately opened the settings. Grant still had administrator privileges, which meant he could simply add someone else tomorrow. Or next week, or while I was at work tonight. Not anymore. I removed his admin access. Made myself the only administrator, one owner, one decision maker, one boundary. Exactly the way it should have been from the beginning. Grant didn't speak to me for 3 days. When he finally did, he looked almost wounded. My mom cried all night. I didn't answer. You embarrassed Courtney? Still, I stayed silent. Then he looked directly at me. You're tearing this family apart. Can I tell you something? People often accuse you of destroying the family. The moment you stop allowing them to take advantage of you, healthy boundaries feel like rejection. To people who benefited from your lack of them. That evening, I sat down to pay the monthly bills. Something caught my attention almost immediately. Our checking account balance looked wrong, lower than it should have been. At first, I assumed I'd forgotten a payment. So I opened the previous month's statement, then the month before that, then another. My heart started beating faster. Grant's automatic contribution had stopped 3 months earlier. Not one transfer, not one explanation, nothing. I highlighted every missing payment, waited until he came home, then quietly placed the statements on the kitchen counter. Grant, where's the money? He barely glanced at the papers. What money? Your share of the bills, he shrugged. I've been helping Mom. Helping her how? A little here and there. I slid the highlighted statements closer. This isn't a little, it's over $5,000 for the first time. Grant looked uncomfortable, only for a second. Then he slipped both hands into his pockets, a habit I'd noticed years ago. Every single time he lied, he looked away and quietly said, "You're making a big deal out of nothing." Maybe. But something deep inside me whispered otherwise. That night, after Grant fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table, opened every bank statement I could find, made a fresh pot of coffee, and decided. I wasn't looking for excuses anymore. I was looking for the truth, and I had no idea just how devastating that truth was about to become. That night, I made myself another cup of coffee, not because I wanted it, because I knew I wasn't going to sleep. The kitchen was completely silent. Grant was asleep upstairs. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the stove. I opened every bank statement from the past 8 months. One by one, at first, nothing seemed unusual: groceries, electric bills, insurance, gas, normal life. Then, a charge caught my attention: Meyers Home Solutions. $2,600. I frowned. I didn't recognize the company. Maybe it was a contractor. I checked the following month. Another payment. $3,200. The month after that, $4,800. Every month, more money, different amounts. Same company. Can you imagine seeing thousands of dollars disappear from your joint account to a company you've never even heard of? I opened my laptop, typed the name into Google. Nothing. No website, no reviews, no office, no business listings, just a single business registration, registered by Grant Meyers. My stomach dropped. I searched our home records. No roof replacement, no flooring work, no plumbing renovation, nothing. Every invoice claimed work had been completed on repairs that had never happened. I sat back in my chair. Suddenly, the missing $5,000 wasn't the real problem. It was only the beginning. The next morning, I drove to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about those payments. During my lunch break, I quietly searched the guest room while Grant was away at a sales meeting. His desk drawer was locked. I smiled sadly. He'd forgotten something. Years earlier, he'd given me a spare key. Inside the drawer, I found exactly what my instincts had been warning me about: a checkbook, business paperwork, and a bank statement. The account belonged to Vivian. I slowly scanned the deposits. January, February, March, April, every amount matched the payments from our joint checking account. By the time I reached the final page, I whispered, "Oh my God, $23,400, every single dollar, transferred from the fake company into Vivian's savings account." I didn't cry, not then. I took photographs of every document, every page, every transaction. Carefully placed everything back exactly where I'd found it, locked the drawer, and drove back to the hospital. I sat alone inside my car for almost 10 minutes, both hands gripping the steering wheel. Do you know what's strange? The moment your worst fear becomes undeniable, you stop hoping you're wrong. Instead, you start making a plan. The following afternoon, I met with a divorce attorney. Her name was Ellen. She spent almost 20 minutes reading every document I'd brought. When she finally looked up, she removed her glasses and quietly said, "Teresa, your parents protected you." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She picked up the deed. "The house is legally yours. Separate property. The gift letter your parents signed before the wedding makes that very clear." For the first time in days, I could finally breathe. "What about the money?" She looked down at the bank statements. "We'll need a forensic accountant. But if these records are accurate," she paused, "your husband has a very serious problem." She handed me the name of an accountant, then leaned forward. "I have one piece of advice. Don't confront him, not yet. Keep gathering evidence. Let him believe everything is normal. Can I tell you something? That may have been the hardest advice I've ever followed. Because every single night, I sat across the dinner table from the man who had lied to my face for months. I listened to him ask about my day, watched him smile, watched him pretend nothing had happened, all while knowing exactly where our money had gone. 3 weeks later, the forensic accountant finished her report. 14 pages, every transfer, every fake invoice, every dollar traced, total misappropriated funds: $23,400. I held the report in my hands. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like the end of a marriage. That Thursday evening, Grant sat across from me with the biggest smile I'd seen in months. "I've got great news." I looked up. "What is it?" "Mom's apartment lease ends next month." I already knew where this was going. "I think it's finally time." He smiled wider. "She should move in permanently." He leaned back confidently. "The guest room is already hers." Then he said the sentence that made me realize he had absolutely no idea what was coming. "I've already told Mom to start packing." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not because I agreed, because I was ready. "Let's talk about it," I said softly. "At dinner this Saturday, invite everyone. Your mom, Courtney, my parents. If we're making a decision this important, everyone deserves to hear it." His face lit up. "I knew you'd come around." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He thought he'd won. He had no idea that I had already prepared the deed, the forensic report, the divorce papers, and enough evidence to destroy every lie he'd spent months building. Saturday night, 7 people would sit around my dining table. Only one of them knew that dinner wasn't going to end with a celebration. It was going to end with the truth. Saturday arrived. I woke up before sunrise. Not because I was nervous, because I wanted everything to be perfect. The dining table was set with my best dishes. Fresh flowers sat in the center. Chicken marsala, Vivian's favorite, filled the house with its rich aroma. It might sound strange, but I wanted no one to remember that night because of the food. I wanted them to remember it because the truth finally had a seat at the table. By 5:30, everyone had arrived. My parents, Grant, Vivian, Courtney, 7 people, one secret, Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Vivian complimented the meal 3 different times. Courtney talked about a concert she wanted to attend. Grant poured everyone's wine with that same confident smile I'd fallen in love with years ago. Looking at him, you never would have guessed he was hiding anything. After dessert, Grant tapped his fork against his glass. I have an announcement. He stood up proudly. My mom's lease ends next month. Vivian smiled before he even finished. So, he looked around the table. Teresa and I have decided she'll be moving in with us permanently. Courtney clapped excitedly. I knew it. Grant wasn't finished. We're converting the study into Mom's sitting room. And Courtney, he laughed, you're welcome anytime. I've already ordered another key. Then he looked at me. Right, babe? Every face turned toward me. I slowly folded my napkin, stood up, and smiled, not because I was happy, because I was finally free. Actually, Grant, I'm glad you brought everyone together. I reached behind my chair and placed a thick manila folder on the table. The room immediately grew quiet. This, I said, holding up the first document, is the deed to this house. I looked around the table. My name is the only one on it. My maiden name. My parents bought this house before we were married. I handed the deed to my father. He adjusted his glasses. That's correct. Your mother and I saved 20 years for this home. It belongs to Teresa. Nobody spoke. Grant's smile disappeared. Teresa, what are you doing? I'm answering your announcement. I picked up the second document. This is the notarized gift letter my parents signed before our wedding. It clearly states this property is my sole and separate property. Vivian slowly lowered her coffee cup. Her hands had started trembling. Then I picked up the forensic report. The house isn't even the biggest issue. I opened to the highlighted pages. For the last 8 months, Grant created a company called Meyers Home Solutions. A company with no employees, no office, and no actual work. I read each amount calmly. $2,600, $3,200, $4,800, 11 fake invoices, $23,400. Every number echoed through the room. I looked directly at Vivian. Every dollar ended up in your savings account. The color drained from her face. Courtney looked at Grant. What is she talking about? Grant finally found his voice. You went through my things. I reviewed our joint bank account. I had every legal right to, and when I discovered thousands of dollars missing, I hired a forensic accountant. I slid the report across the table. Everything is documented. Every transfer, every fake invoice, every deposit. Grant stared at the papers. He didn't deny a single word because he couldn't. Vivian suddenly slammed her hand on the table. This isn't what it looks like. I met her eyes. Then tell me, what does it look like? Silence. She had no answer. Then she whispered, I just wanted a home again. My heart genuinely ached for her. I know what happened to you years ago. I know losing your home broke your heart, but stealing mine was never going to heal yours. The room became so quiet you could hear the clock in the kitchen ticking. Finally, I pulled one last envelope from the folder. These are divorce papers. Grant looked like the air had been knocked out of him. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. He reached toward me. We can fix this. I stepped back. No, we could have fixed this the first time you ignored my boundaries. The first time you gave away my house key. The first time you chose your mother's wishes over your wife's trust. But every decision after that was yours. For the first time all evening. My father stood. He looked directly at Grant. You weren't just given a wife. You were welcomed into our family. And you chose to betray that trust. Grant lowered his head. There was nothing left to say. Vivian quietly picked up the china dishes she'd brought for the celebration. One slipped from her shaking hands. It shattered on the kitchen floor. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It somehow felt like the perfect ending, not because the plate broke. Because the illusion had. Within a week, Grant moved out. A few months later, the court confirmed exactly what my father had protected years before. The house was mine. The fraudulent transfers were traced. Grant was ordered to repay what he had taken. The fake company disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Today, the navy curtains my mother helped me choose are hanging in the living room again. The guest room belongs to guests. My office door stays open because I no longer feel the need to lock it. Every spring, my father still helps me plant flowers along the front walkway. Sometimes we sit on the porch afterward with 2 cups of coffee, not saying much, just enjoying the peace. Looking back, I don't think my parents' greatest gift was the house. It was the lesson that came with it. Love people, forgive when you can, help when it feels right, but never confuse kindness with surrender. Because a home isn't just walls and a roof. It's the place where your peace lives, and protecting your peace is never something you should apologize for. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to know what part stayed with you the most. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when everyone expected you to stay quiet? Share your story in the comments. It may help someone else feel less alone. And if you enjoy emotional stories about family, betrayal, justice, and finding the strength to protect your peace, I'd be honored if you subscribe to Sad Drama Stories. Thank you for spending your time with me, and until next time, take care of yourself.